I never thought that the day I received my autism diagnosis would become the beginning of the most successful chapter of my life. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was broken. The words still echo in my mind. No one will hire you with that diagnosis. Those words came from my own mother, spoken in a moment of fear and misunderstanding that would haunt me for years. But today, as I look at my calendar filled with client appointments and my bank account showing numbers I never dreamed possible, I realize that what they called a limitation became my greatest strength. Before I continue with this story that completely transformed my perspective on neurodivergence, if you believe that our differences can be our superpowers, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about overcoming prejudice and finding success. Your support helps spread awareness about autism and other neurological conditions that affect millions of people worldwide. It all started 3 years ago when I was working at a small marketing agency in downtown Seattle. I had managed to hide my autistic traits for years, masking my way through social interactions and forcing myself into neurotypical patterns that left me exhausted every single day. I would spend my lunch breaks locked in the bathroom stall, overwhelmed by the fluorescent lights and constant chatter of the open office. The smell of microwaved fish from the break room would trigger my sensory sensitivities so intensely that I'd have to excuse myself and step outside, gasping for fresh air. My colleagues saw me as the quiet, antisocial girl who never participated in happy hours or office birthday parties. What they didn't understand was that those environments felt like torture to my overstimulated nervous system. The unpredictable social dynamics, the need to make small talk, and the sensory overload of multiple conversations happening simultaneously made it impossible for me to function normally. Despite my struggles, I excelled at my work. I could analyze data patterns that others missed, create systematic approaches to complex problems, and focus intensely on projects for hours without distraction. My attention to detail was unmatched, and I consistently delivered high-quality work ahead of deadlines. But none of that seemed to matter to my supervisor, Janet, who was more concerned with my lack of team spirit and cultural fit. The breaking point came during a team meeting about a major client presentation. We were discussing strategy for a tech startup's rebranding campaign, and I noticed several fundamental flaws in their approach. The target demographic analysis was incomplete, the messaging wasn't aligned with current market trends, and the visual elements would likely fail accessibility standards. When I tried to voice my concerns, Janet cut me off mid-sentence. "Sarah, we need solutions, not problems," she said dismissively. "Maybe if you spent less time nitpicking and more time collaborating, you'd understand what this client actually needs." The room fell silent. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment as my colleagues avoided eye contact. My heart was racing, and I could feel that familiar sensation of the world becoming too loud, too bright, too much. I excused myself and spent the rest of the day working from the supply closet, the only quiet space I could find. That evening, I decided I couldn't continue living this way. The constant masking was destroying my mental health, and I was experiencing what I now know were autistic burnouts every few weeks. I scheduled an appointment with a neuropsychologist who specialized in adult autism diagnosis, particularly in women who had been missed during childhood. The evaluation process took several weeks and included detailed interviews about my childhood, questionnaires about my sensory experiences, and cognitive assessments. When Dr. Martinez finally delivered the results, I felt a complex mix of relief and terror. "Sarah, you meet the criteria for autism spectrum disorder, level 1. This explains many of the challenges you've been experiencing with social communication and sensory processing." I sat in her office, processing this information that finally gave a name to my lifelong struggles. Dr. Martinez explained that many women with autism go undiagnosed because they develop sophisticated masking strategies early in life. She talked about how my intense focus, pattern recognition abilities, and systematic thinking were neurological strengths, not deficits. "Your brain works differently," she said gently, "and in many contexts that difference can be a significant advantage." I decided to share my diagnosis with my family first. My parents' reaction was devastating. My mother immediately started researching cures and insisted that I shouldn't tell anyone else about the diagnosis. People will think you're disabled, she said, tears streaming down her face. No one will hire you with that diagnosis. You need to keep this secret. My father was more supportive but equally concerned about the professional implications. Maybe you should look into jobs that don't require much social interaction, he suggested. Something in data entry or filing, where you can work alone. Their reactions reinforced every fear I had about being autistic in a neurotypical world. I felt like I was carrying a shameful secret that could destroy my career if anyone discovered it. I decided to tell only my closest friend, Emma, who had been my roommate in college. Emma's response was completely different. This makes so much sense, she said, giving me a hug. I've always admired how you can focus on things for hours and notice details that everyone else misses. Remember how you helped me with my statistics homework? You saw patterns in the data that even the professor missed. Her acceptance meant everything to me, but I still wasn't ready to disclose my diagnosis at work. Instead, I started researching autism and began to understand my sensory needs and processing differences. I learned about stimming, special interests, and the double empathy problem that explains why autistic and neurotypical people often misunderstand each other. The more I learned about autism, the more I realized that many of my perceived weaknesses were actually manifestations of autistic strengths being forced into neurotypical frameworks. My obsessive attention to detail was actually a valuable quality in marketing analysis. My difficulty with small talk wasn't rudeness, it was a preference for meaningful, focused communication. My need for routine and predictability wasn't inflexibility, it was how I managed sensory overwhelm and maintained optimal performance. Armed with this new self-understanding, I started making small accommodations for myself at work. I brought noise-canceling headphones and explained to colleagues that I focus better with them. I started taking regular breaks outside to manage sensory overwhelm. I began advocating for written communication instead of verbal instructions when possible. The changes helped, but the fundamental problem remained. I was still trying to fit into a workplace culture that wasn't designed for neurodivergent minds. The final straw came 6 months after my diagnosis, during the company holiday party. The event was held in a restaurant with dim lighting, loud music, and dozens of conversations happening simultaneously. The sensory environment was overwhelming, and I spent most of the evening standing near the exit, trying to manage my anxiety. When Janet approached me with a drink in her hand, clearly intoxicated, the conversation took a turn that would change everything. You know, Sarah, she slurred, you're really good at your job, but you're so weird. Like, really weird. Do you have some kind of mental problem or something? I felt like I'd been slapped. The casual cruelty of her words, combined with the sensory overwhelm of the environment, triggered what I now recognize as an autistic meltdown. I couldn't speak, couldn't think clearly, and felt completely overwhelmed by emotion and sensation. I grabbed my coat and left without saying goodbye to anyone. The next Monday, Janet called me into her office for what she termed a performance conversation. She claimed that my antisocial behavior at the holiday party was concerning and suggested that I might need to seek professional help for my social anxiety issues. I think you should consider whether this is the right environment for you, she said, not quite firing me but making it clear that my days were numbered. Marketing is a people business, and you just don't seem to connect with people the way our clients expect. I sat there listening to her criticism, feeling smaller and smaller with each word. But then something shifted. Dr. Martinez's words came back to me. Your brain works differently, and in many contexts, that difference can be a significant advantage. I realized that I had been trying to succeed in a system that was fundamentally incompatible with how my brain worked. Instead of continuing to exhaust myself trying to fit in, maybe it was time to create my own path. That evening, I submitted my resignation. I had enough savings to survive for a few months, and I decided to try freelance marketing consulting. My plan was simple: find clients who valued results over office politics, and create a work environment that accommodated my autistic needs. My first client came through Emma, who had started working at a tech startup. The company needed help with their content marketing strategy, and she recommended me based on my analytical skills and attention to detail. The founder, Marcus, was willing to work with me remotely, and communicated primarily through email and structured video calls. Working with Marcus was a revelation. Without the constant sensory overload and social demands of an office environment, I was able to focus entirely on the work. I analyzed their existing content performance, identified gaps in their strategy, and developed a comprehensive plan that increased their organic traffic by 300% within 2 months. Marcus was thrilled with the results and referred me to other startup founders in his network. Word spread quickly about my analytical approach and systematic methodology. I wasn't the consultant who would take clients out for drinks or schmooze at networking events, but I was the one who could transform their marketing performance with data-driven strategies and meticulous execution. As my client base grew, I began to notice that many of my most successful collaborations were with other neurodivergent entrepreneurs. They appreciated my direct communication style, my focus on substance over social niceties, and my ability to identify problems and solutions that others missed. 6 months into my freelance career, I was earning more than I had at the agency and working with clients who genuinely valued my contributions. But the biggest breakthrough came when I decided to be open about my autism diagnosis. I was working with a client named David, helping his company develop an accessibility strategy for their website. During one of our video calls, he mentioned that his daughter had recently been diagnosed with autism and was struggling with the transition to middle school. Without thinking, I said, "I was diagnosed with autism as an adult, and I wish someone had told me earlier that it was okay to need different accommodations. Your daughter isn't broken. She just processes the world differently." David paused for a moment, then smiled. "I had no idea. That explains why you're so good at identifying accessibility issues that everyone else misses. You're not just designing for compliance, you're designing from lived experience." That conversation led to the most rewarding project of my career. David's company was developing an educational app for neurodivergent children, and he asked me to lead the user experience research. For the first time in my professional life, my autism wasn't something to hide or overcome. It was a qualification. I interviewed dozens of autistic children and their families, analyzed patterns in their feedback, and developed design recommendations that would make the app truly accessible. The project won several awards for inclusive design, and David credited my unique perspective as the key to its success. Word about my work in neurodivergent-focused design spread throughout the tech community. I started receiving requests from companies who specifically wanted an autistic consultant to help them understand neurodivergent users. My rates doubled, then tripled as demand for my specialized expertise grew. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same traits that had made me a cultural misfit at the agency, my intense focus, pattern recognition abilities, and different way of processing information, were exactly what made me invaluable to these clients. A year after leaving the agency, I had a waiting list of potential clients and was earning more than Janet's salary. But the real validation came when I received an unexpected phone call from Marcus, my first client, who had since sold his startup for several $1,000,000. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," he said. "The marketing strategy you developed for us was a major factor in our acquisition. The investors were specifically interested in our content performance and organic growth metrics. You literally helped us build the foundation that made this exit possible." I hung up the phone and looked around my home office, a space I had designed to accommodate my sensory needs, with adjustable lighting, noise control, and all the tools I needed to do my best work. My calendar showed back-to-back consultations with innovative companies that sought out my perspective specifically because I think differently. That evening, I decided to call my mother. We hadn't spoken much since my diagnosis, and I wanted to share my success with her. When I told her about my thriving business and growing reputation as a specialist in neurodivergent user experience, she was quiet for a long moment. "I was wrong," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so scared that your diagnosis would limit your opportunities that I couldn't see how it might actually be your strength. I'm proud of you for proving me wrong." My father got on the phone and apologized for suggesting I should hide in a filing job. "You've built something incredible," he said, "and you did it by being authentically yourself, not by trying to be someone else." The conversation with my parents marked a turning point in how I viewed my autism diagnosis. Instead of seeing it as a limitation to overcome, I began to understand it as a neurological difference that, in the right environment, could be a significant advantage. I started speaking at conferences about neurodivergent perspectives in design and marketing. I wrote articles about the importance of cognitive diversity in business. I mentored other autistic adults who were struggling to find their place in traditional work environments. One of my favorite success stories involves Maria, a young woman who contacted me after hearing one of my presentations. She had been diagnosed with autism in college and was convinced that she would never succeed in a business career. Her professors had suggested she consider more suitable fields like library science or computer programming, careers that required minimal social interaction. But Maria was passionate about environmental sustainability and wanted to work in corporate social responsibility. I helped her develop a freelance practice focused on sustainability auditing for small businesses, leveraging her autistic traits of attention to detail and systematic thinking. Today, Maria runs a successful consulting firm with a team of neurodivergent professionals who specialize in environmental compliance. She regularly speaks at business conferences about the intersection of neurodiversity and sustainability, showing how different perspectives can drive innovation in corporate responsibility. Stories like Maria's remind me why representation matters. When neurodivergent people see others like themselves succeeding in unexpected fields, it expands their sense of what's possible. We don't have to limit ourselves to stereotypical autism jobs. We can succeed in any field where our unique strengths are valued and accommodated. Last month, I received an email that brought my journey full circle. Janet, my former supervisor from the agency, had found my website and wanted to hire me for a project. Her company was struggling with their digital accessibility compliance, and she had heard about my expertise in the field. I agreed to take the project, curious to see how our dynamic would be different now that I was in a position of professional authority. When we had our initial video call, Janet seemed nervous and overly deferential, a stark contrast to her dismissive attitude when I worked for her. "I have to admit," she said during our conversation, "I never understood your approach when you worked here, but looking at your success and the work you're doing now, I realize I was probably missing out on valuable insights." I could have gloated or reminded her of how she had treated me, but instead, I chose to use the conversation as a teaching moment. I explained how traditional office environments can be challenging for neurodivergent employees and suggested some simple accommodations that could help companies retain talented neurodivergent workers. Janet listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions about creating more inclusive workplaces. By the end of our call, she had committed to implementing several neurodiversity-friendly policies at her agency, including flexible work arrangements and sensory accommodations. The project went smoothly, and Janet's team was impressed with the thoroughness of my accessibility audit. More importantly, Janet seemed to genuinely understand how her previous management approach had failed to recognize and nurture different types of talent. As I look back on my journey from a struggling, masked employee to a successful neurodivergent entrepreneur, I realized that my autism diagnosis wasn't the obstacle my family feared it would be. It was the key to understanding my true potential. My intense focus allows me to dive deep into complex problems and develop comprehensive solutions. My pattern recognition abilities help me identify trends and opportunities that others miss. My attention to detail ensures that my work meets the highest standards of quality and accuracy. My different way of processing information brings fresh perspectives to challenges that have stumped neurotypical teams. Most importantly, my lived experience as an autistic person gives me insights into accessibility and user experience that can't be learned from textbooks or training programs. I don't just design for neurodivergent users, I am a neurodivergent user, and that authenticity resonates with clients who are serious about inclusive design. Today, my consulting practice focuses on three main areas: neurodivergent user experience research, accessibility compliance for digital products, and organizational neurodiversity consulting. I work with everyone from Fortune 500 companies to innovative startups, helping them understand how cognitive diversity can drive innovation and business success. My waiting list extends 6 months out, and my rates reflect the specialized value I bring to each project. I've hired 2 other neurodivergent consultants to help manage the demand, creating employment opportunities for talented professionals who might struggle in traditional corporate environments. But beyond the financial success, what matters most to me is the impact this work has on the neurodivergent community. Every accessible website I help design, every inclusive policy I help implement, and every neurodivergent professional I mentor represents progress toward a more inclusive society. The world told me that my autism diagnosis would limit my career prospects, but instead, it became the foundation of my professional identity. I'm not successful despite being autistic. I'm successful because I'm autistic, and I found ways to leverage my neurological differences as competitive advantages. To anyone who has received a neurodivergent diagnosis and fears it will limit their potential, your brain works differently, and in the right environment, that difference can be your greatest strength. Don't let others define what's possible for you based on their limited understanding of neurodiversity. The same traits that make you different might be exactly what the world needs. Your unique perspective, your different way of processing information, and your specialized interests could be the keys to innovations that neurotypical minds would never discover. It took me years to stop seeing my autism as something to overcome and start seeing it as something to leverage. But once I made that shift, everything changed. The clients who value my work don't want me to be more neurotypical. They specifically seek out my neurodivergent perspective because it gives them competitive advantages they can't get anywhere else. The diagnosis that my mother feared would destroy my career actually became the foundation for the most successful and fulfilling work of my life. And every day, I get to wake up and be authentically myself while building a business that creates value for my clients and opportunities for other neurodivergent professionals. That, to me, is the true power of embracing neurodiversity, not just accepting that we're different, but celebrating how those differences can change the world for the better.